Welcome, everyone. This is part of a series of special events that we run every quarter or when I remember. And I remember this time, and every time we have a special guest. And today we're going to talk about data visualization. So, if you need to present data as part of your activities, as part of your roles, this session is going to be perfect for you. And before we get started, just a super quick intro from my side. My name is Andrea. I'm the head of Ideas on Stage UK. I'm a presentation coach. We specialize in working with business owners, leaders, and their teams who want to become more confident presenters. In the last 15 years, we've worked with thousands of clients around the world, including business leaders from organizations like eBay, Salesforce, Amazon, Spotify, and more than 500 TEDx speakers. Our mission is to stop great ideas from failing just because of the way they are presented. And our vision is to help hundreds of thousands of business leaders inspire their audiences, increase their influence, and make a positive impact in the world. And that's it. Enough about me. Just a couple of house rules. Now, I see lots of you already, which is great. For the others, you don't have to, but if you feel like it, if you'd like to turn your webcam on, that's the best thing we can do to have a good connection with each other. And also, feel free to use the chat. Any ideas you'd like to share, let's make it interactive. In particular, if you have any questions for our speaker today, please make sure that you type your questions in the chat, and then we are going to collect them at the end, because our speaker is going to talk for about half an hour, and then we'll have an opportunity to ask him questions, and then we're going to close. Very simple. I also want to thank our supporting partners. You'll see some names of great organizations with their links in the chat. Feel free to check them out. It's also thanks to them if we have an opportunity to run these events. We've got organizations like Startups Magazine, Impact Hub London, Everyday People, The Visual Jam, Tech Italia London, Investors, and Growth Builders. And by the way, stay tuned, because at the end of this session, I'll give you access to a virtual goodie bag, which is a collection of free resources and promotions from our supporting partners. And our speaker today is an economist, writer, teacher, and data communications expert. He's considered a leading voice for clarity and accessibility in how analysts, researchers, and scholars communicate their findings. He's the author of three fantastic books, highly recommend them. And together, these three books give you a very comprehensive guide to creating, communicating, and distributing data rich content. The three books are Better Presentations, Elevate the Debate, and Better Data Visualizations, which is very much connected to what we are going to cover today. I know you're going to learn so much today, so please welcome with a big virtual round of applause, Dr. Jonathan Schwabish. John, thank you very much for being here. Whenever you want, the audience is all yours.
Thank you, Andrea. Hi, everybody. Good morning, afternoon, evening, depending where you are. Great to see smiling faces. Always good on a Tuesday morning, my time here in the East Coast of DC, of the US, outside DC. Lots of great comments already in the chat window. I hope you're ready because we're going to use the chat window in this talk. My goal over the next 30 minutes or so is to provide you with what I think are some of the core practices, ideas, strategies for creating better data visualizations for any of your communication products. It could be a website, could be a report, could be a presentation, anything that you are using to present your information. So let me move over to my slides here. And I want to start us off with a short story. We are all, I think, the one thing the world can agree on is we're all fans of Taylor Swift. We all love her. We all want to be her. But the one thing you may not know about Taylor Swift, or at least suspect, but maybe don't know, is how much her net worth is. And there was a story a few months ago about her net worth. And I want to show you how two different news organizations presented the same information. So the first organization I want to show you is how the Guardian newspaper in the UK presented this information. And so this is how they presented it. Now, as Andrea mentioned, I'm an economist by training. This is not a very surprising way for me to see data presented, just basically written in a long paragraph. I've highlighted some of the numbers here so you can see the value of her homes, her music catalog, the streaming deals, and so on and so forth. Now, um, fairly straightforward, not even a bar chart, not even any sort of data visualization, just text. Now, what you may not know, I don't know if anybody's been to a Taylor Swift concert in the Eras tour, but what you may not know is that one of the aspects of the Taylor Swift community when you go to a concert is to create these beaded bracelets. And so what happens is people bring, I've never been, I will say I've never been, so this is all hearsay. This is all that I've learned, and this is not a Taylor Swift bracelet I'm not wearing right now. It is a data bracelet, but it's not a Taylor Swift bracelet. But it's very similar. So what happens at these Taylor Swift concerts is you go to the show, you make these bracelets, or you can make them there, and then you share the bracelets. And it's just a way of building community amongst the fans. Okay, I see a couple people nodding, which means there's a few people here who have been to a Taylor Swift concert. Okay, so with that in the back of your mind, let me show you how Bloomberg News presented the same exact information. And this is how they presented the information. And as you can see, they use this idea of using these beads in the presentation of the data. Same exact data, two very different ways. And further on down in the article, they actually tell you a little bit about, these friendship bracelets that people trade. And the point here is to say that not that you need to use beads and crafts in all of your data visualizations, although you shouldn't shy away from that. But there are lots of ways to create, disseminate, and communicate data that may move beyond what we all sort of generally know and are familiar with in our data visualizations, right? The drop-down menus in Excel and PowerPoint and our basic tools of bar charts, line charts, pie charts, and area charts. We can sometimes go beyond that. And sometimes going beyond that can help us engage our readers, our audience members, or our users. And so as you think about visualizing your data, I would encourage you just, don't be bound by what's in your software tool. Don't be bound by what's in that drop-down menu. There are lots of times when you need to break beyond, you need to bend the rules or break the rules to engage people and to bring them in to your visualization, whether it be your report, your slides, your website, whatever it might be. So my goal for the next 30 minutes is I have two learning goals for us. The first learning goal is I want to show you how our eye brain, the human eye brain system, facilitates the understanding of information. And I think by doing that in the context of data visualization, you're going to see that how we as human beings, which means your readers and your audience members, how we see data and how we see graphs and charts and diagrams is just how we see anything out in the world. And then the second part, I'm going to give you some of my overarching and a couple of specific strategies to create what I think are more effective and more clear data visualizations. So the first part is, how does our eye brain system work? And there's lots of models for how our brain works. I like this model called pre-attentive processing for this concept, particularly for data visualization. And the formal definition of pre-attentive processing is a bit dense, I'll admit. The formal definition is here on the slide: cognitive operations that can be performed prior to focusing attention on any particular region of an image, which is, I admit, sort of a dense statement. So really what you could think of is pre-attentive processing is the stuff you notice right away. And when we are creating charts and graphs and diagrams where we are trying to make an argument, we are trying to make a point, we are even trying to tell a story, those are the things that we want people to see. We want people to see that this line is going up. This bar is taller than these other bars. This dot is more important than these other dots in this map or in this scatter plot or in this chart. So let's start very simply here. And as I mentioned, we're going to use the chat window for especially this first part of the talk. So let me ask you very simply. Now, I don't know if everybody knows Waldo. I know in the UK, he's called Wally. I don't know what he's called in France, although I did have people in Paris telling me there is no Waldo in France, but that's not true. I have seen the Waldo books. And Charlie in France, thank you. So when you look at this slide, What is it about Waldo that makes him stand out? What is it about Waldo that makes him easy to find in this slide? And a secondary question for those who are really engaged, what's the name of the other guy? So I'll give you a couple seconds. What is it about Waldo that makes him easy to find? Just put it in the chat window here. Okay, and I see a bunch of people already saying we've got the different colors. Yes, we've got the red and white striped shirt. We've got the blue pants versus the black and yellow of the other guy. We'll get to the other guy in a second. I see someone's mentioned the walking stick. Yeah, so Waldo's holding the cane or the walking stick, whereas the other guy's not. Anything else? Oh, Milan mentions posture. Yes. So Laura also mentions posture. Thank you. So Waldo's sort of standing straight up. The other guy, whose name is Odlaw, which is Waldo spelled backwards. He's the bad guy in the Waldo book. So he's got sort of the bad guy lean, right? He's the bad guy. So you can see already some of these differences, right? So yes, Keisha mentions the facial expression, his smile, or the mustache versus the lack of mustache, the eyeglasses, all these things that you've mentioned. Let's say the color and just the angle of, say, how he's standing, his posture. These are things that we would call pre-attentive attributes. And there's a whole set of pre-attentive attributes that we can use in our visual display of information. Things like shape and enclosure, the width of a line, different colors, different positions, different lengths. I've only listed 15 here, but there are many more. I haven't talked about motion or animation or interactivity. But what you can see here in this grouping is the one in each of these 15 different groups is the one thing that's kind of different from the other things, right? And we can use this to our advantage when we are presenting information to an audience or we're presenting it in a document to help direct people's attention to where we want it to go. So I'd like to test this with you. I'd like to demonstrate how pre-attentive processing works. And we're going to start very simply. We're not going to talk about data or data visualization. We're just going to talk about pictures. And so I'm going to ask you a couple of questions. And I'd like you just to put your answer into the chat window. And as you are going to see, the more people who answer these questions, we have, Andrea, what do we have? We have 75 people in the room. So the more people that answer these questions in the chat window, the clearer the answer is going to become to you. All right. So here's my question for you. When you look at the next slide, which is going to be a photograph, where does your eye tend to go first? Where does your eye tend to go first when you look at this photograph? I'm going to give you a few seconds here just so we can get a good sample. We've got a lot of answers coming in. I appreciate it. So we have, I think, as I go through here, we have 100% agreement that we all go to that red bird. I live in Virginia. The cardinal is the Virginia state bird. It is not the reason why I picked this picture, but it does help to sort of lock that in. Okay, let's do another photograph. Where does your eye tend to go first when you look at this photograph? So same question, different photograph. Where does your eye tend to go first? And I'll also say, if you are not going where everybody else is going, you do not need to see a neurologist or an optometrist. It's not that kind of test, okay? Just trying to see where we all tend to go. And I'm just going to scroll up and down through this long chat window. Lots of great answers. Thank you. I think we have, I think, 100% agreement on this slide as well. Okay, so we're all going to the red, creepy kind of red lamp eye sign there in the top right of this photograph. All right, let's do one more. Where does your eye tend to go first when you look at this photograph? And now, as you can see, let's just watch these answers come in. You can see, and I see a couple of people. Sanji and Kafiat said like all over the place. Laurel says everywhere. Elaine says the empty space. And then we had a bunch of people. Some people going to the oranges, some people going to the bananas, some people going to, I think someone's called it the green thing, the plant at the bottom. I haven't seen anybody going to the cookies yet. Anecdotally speaking, I will say afternoon sessions, more people go to the cookies than in morning sessions. So I don't know what that's about. But as you can see here, we have much less agreement about where we go in this photograph relative to the previous two. And it's not a comment on the quality of this photograph. It's just to say that this photograph has more balance than the other two, so it's not exactly clear where our attention is supposed to go. All right, so let's go now a little bit towards data. What I'm going to do on the next slide is I'm going to show you a block of digits, okay? Just a big block of digits. And what I'd like you to do is to count the number of times you see the number 3 on this slide and put your answer into the chat window, okay? So how many occurrences of the number 3 did you see on the slide? Now to do this, I'm only going to give you 4 seconds. You're going to have 4 seconds to accomplish this task. Count the number of 3s and put them in the chat window. Okay, so here we go. 3, 2, 1. Oh, someone's just trying to get into the room, so that messed up my counter. Here we go. All right, here we go. 3, 2, 1, go. And that's all you get. That's 4 seconds, maybe a quick 4. All right, what did you see? How many 3s did you see? And now this is always the hardest part of a presenter doing this experiment, is getting this range. So I think we have a range of 3 to 7, I think is our range with so pretty wide variation in there. Okay. All right, so we're going to do similar experiment. I'm going to take the same number of digits. I'm going to show you the same number of digits, but I've scrambled them all up so they're not in the same position. I'm going to ask you to do the same thing. Count the number of 3s that you see on the screen, okay? But instead of 4 seconds, I'm only going to give you 2 seconds this time. Same task, half as much time. Okay, here we go. 3, 2, 1, go. How many 3s did you see that time? Holy moly, look at all these 7s coming through our chat window. Why are we so much faster, so much more confident, so much more in agreement in the second pass through than in the first pass through, right? And you're all saying to yourselves, well, I know why, right? It's because he put those highlights around them. Yeah, so a couple people mentioned they're shaded, they're highlighted. They have this box, they're enclosed, right? One of our pre-attentive attributes. There's lots of other attributes we could use to do this same sort of experiment, right? We could use different color. We could use different widths of different lines, right? These are all ways that we can make this task of very simply of counting these numbers in this block of digits much easier, much faster for us. All right, we've gone from photographs to numbers. Let's go to data visualization. The pre-attentive attribute of a line chart, for example, like the one you see here, is the position of the points in the space, and then, of course, the angle of the line that connects them. And I can't even tell you how many graphs like this I have made over the course of my career here in the US, working in the federal government and public policy, adding these projection or forecast graphs. Just by adding this big gray box, I can move your eye over to the right side of the screen so that you focus on what I believe is the most important part of this graph. And you can see this in other pre-attentive attributes used in practice all the time. This is from the New York Times, showing a line chart of the number of people who are uninsured for health insurance here in the US. You can see after universal health care was passed here in the US in 2013, the number of uninsured Americans drops. And then we've got this big gray box over onto the right side, right? This big gray box with all of these additional numbers attracting our attention, bringing our attention over there. This one just came out. I saw this one a few weeks ago. This is showing the diversity in the U.S. House of Representatives. And you can see, like, your eye is going over to that right side where that big gray bar is, right? Because that's the thing that's attracting your attention. That's the box around those 3s. Here's another example. This is from, well, the now defunct 538. I don't know anything about soccer or football. I know, okay, I'm an American. Sorry, hate to break it to you. I'm calling it soccer. I don't really know anything about soccer. But what I do know is that I love this graph, because if I told you before I showed this to you, do you think a graph with 3,300 lines on it is going to be easy to read? I'd put money on you all saying, no way, it's going to be a terrible graph. But I think we can agree this is a pretty easy graph to read, right? Because the point of the graph is for us to focus on Messi and Ronaldo, possibly the only 2 soccer players I know, right? Because the position of the lines is much different than the other 3,280. Those lines have color associated with them. They are thicker. They are labeled. All of those pre-attentive attributes bring our attention to that part of the graph, while also giving us a relative story of all these other soccer players. We can see this here in The Economist in a bubble chart. I don't know how they created this. I like to think that they were in a room and they said, let's make a scatter plot. That's not very clear. Let's add some color. That's not very clear. Let's add these like bubbles around it. So now I can see that Europe is in the bottom right and sub-Saharan Africa crosses, kind of the middle of the graph. And let me tell you, I've presented to, lots of especially economists, and economists will say to me, well, what was the algorithm? What was the calculation they made to draw these bubbles around the dots? And I'll say, I would put money on they did not derive an algorithm or do any calculation. They just drew these bubbles, right? Because the point of this graph is to highlight this. It's probably like a quarter-page image in The Economist magazine. It's not about giving this information to an academic economist so they can do research, or to a policymaker. It is for a specific audience, which, as we're going to talk about in a moment, is probably the number one thing that you can think about when it comes to visualizing your data, which is who is your audience, what do they need, and what do they know. Just a couple more examples here. Oops. Another scatter plot here from the New York Times. More than 2,000 bubbles in this space. Pretty easy to find those four because they're on top of the other ones. They're yellow and they have that bolder outline. And then this one from the New York Times. I think this is my favorite example because it's such a straightforward chart. It's just a gray bar chart, right? And your eye pretty quickly moves to the right side of the graph because those three bars are slightly darker and there's a text box. It just brings your attention right over there. So when you're trying to tell a story or make an argument or make a point, there are very simple things that you can do in your visualizations to help your reader see what you want them to see. Okay, so with that out of our way, in our back pockets now, let me talk about our second learning goal, which is sort of best practices for data visualization. And then when I think about best practices, I focus on sort of five basic strategies, five basic principles when it comes to visualizing data. This is not going to be the end all be all. It's not going to give you everything you need to know, but I have always found if I just tick through these five, when I'm working with my data, I end up in a more effective place with my graphs and charts. So the first strategy or the first guideline principle is to show the data, which sounds obvious, but not everybody does a good job of showing the data because maybe they don't show enough data or they don't show it clearly enough, or they add other things around the graph or the chart or the map to make it harder and harder to get to the data. What you see in front of you is what's called a dot density map. This was created by my friend Aaron Williams at the Washington Post. A dot density map literally places a dot in the geography for every person or every object. And what Aaron did here is he colored the dots by race or ethnicity. Now, what you'll notice now when you look at this map, if you have any familiarity with the shape of the United States, you can sort of see that right away. And if you have more understanding of the US, you can identify certain urban areas like Atlanta and New York and Chicago and Dallas and San Francisco. But what I love about this, and the reason why it's on this slide, is you'll notice that the only thing on the slide is the data, right? Aaron didn't draw borders for the states. He didn't label the states with text. He didn't label different cities. It's just the data. And it doesn't mean that we need to add all of our data all the time. But the point of a visualization is for people to learn something, and they learn something best by seeing the data as clearly as possible. So the first strategy is to show the data. That's what we want to do when we're making our graphs. The second strategy or principle is to reduce the clutter. Most of our data visualization tools still put, in my opinion, too much stuff on our graphs, too many grid lines and tick marks and data markers. This is from the US Department of Agriculture. They've got the 3D effect here, which we don't need, the weird dragon, fish, lizard skin scale thing. I don't know about your monitor, but on mine, even the red borders around the 3D columns like hurt my eyes a little bit. All of this stuff makes it harder and harder for your reader or for your audience member to get to the data, to get to the thing that's important, which is understanding. And we do that as clearly as possible by reducing a lot of the non-data stuff, the stuff that doesn't help people understand. I would also, just parenthetically, I would argue that this 3D effect today in 2025 just looks kind of old. Like the Excel 84, this was really cool. Excel 2025, this is just kind of looking dated and old at this point. So there are lots of other reasons why to avoid 3D, but aesthetically, I would argue that this just kind of needs to go. All right, our third strategy is to integrate the graphics and the text. And I don't have time today to go into this into great detail, but I will just put this succinctly for you. There are three ways that you can do a better job of integrating your graphics with your text. One, um, not all the time, but many times, integrate your legends, integrate your labels directly onto the graph. Okay, don't leave it off to that legend separated over here or below the chart, disconnected from the content. You can see here in this relatively straightforward line chart from the Pew Research Center, there's not a little label or little legend sitting somewhere around the chart with men and women with the little box with the color. It's just directly labeled, right? And admittedly, you can't always do that. A map, almost by definition, is going to need a legend somewhere around the map, maybe not directly on it. But we can label our graphs. Second thing, and maybe the most important thing you could do with a good graph, is to use a good, active, concise title to tell people what they're going to learn from the graph rather than just describing what's in the graph. Again, here, the title here is Labor Force Participation Rate Has Risen for Women, Fallen for Men. I swear if I cut that title off and gave it to anybody that I work with, 90% of them would still write labor force participation rate, comma, men and women, comma, 1950 to 2016. The first one tells you what you're supposed to learn. The second one just tells you what's in the graph. And I have so many people I work with who say, no, 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 no. We can never write an active title. We can't tell people what they're supposed to learn because they'll think we're not being objective or we're being partisan or we're slanting the story. And I'll say, okay, let's not do that. Let's not get anybody in trouble. But let's look at what you wrote about this graph in your report or in the notes to your slide. 99 times out of 100, what they've written is in figure 1, you can see that the labor force participation rate for women has gone up and for men it's gone down. And so my whole argument here for you is to integrate your argument or your story into the visualization rather than leaving it totally separate. So we started with showing the data, reducing the clutter, and integrating the graphics and the text. I have two more for you to just consider. The first one is what are called small multiples, literally just what they look like. Instead of one big graph with everything in it, all of your data, break it up into smaller chunks. So this is just a simple example from the New York Times showing, this is a couple of years old now, showing COVID vaccination rates for different states around the US. And again, instead of having one graph with all of these 15 lines where you just see kind of spaghetti, we break it up into smaller multiple chunks. And the last strategy or principle is what I call starting with gray. And starting with gray is a practical thing that I try to do with every graph, either physically in the tool or just closing my eyes, which is to make everything in my graph the same color, the same weight, the same importance. I make everything gray. Because when I do that, it forces me to make some purposeful decisions about how I can layer on my pre-attentive attributes to direct your attention where I want it to go. Okay. So if I make everything the same color, make everything the same weight, I like gray, you might like blue or purple, whatever you like. If I make everything the same weight, the same thickness, the same color, it then forces me to make some decisions. Okay. So those are our 5 strategies. Let's pull them together into an example. All right. So this is an example from an academic economics journal. The authors here are looking at the relationship between 2 variables and their statistical model, and then they've graphed them out. Let's do the same experiment we did earlier. Where does your eye tend to go first when you look at this exhibit? Where do you find your eye sort of going first? And I see a whole bunch of answers. This is great. See Anna saying my phone, no interest. Yeah, I could understand that. Okay, so I see we've got sort of, I would say maybe 3 sort of classes of answers here, more or less. Several people going to the top left, which in English speaking societies makes sense, right? It's kind of how we start reading. A bunch of people sort of going all over the place, not sure where to go, and then a whole bunch of other people going as LaDonna said and Pedro said, the black thick line in the middle of these graphs, right? And of course, none of those are surprising, I don't think, to any of us. But let's focus on that black line in the middle. Remember that one of our pre-attentive attributes is line thickness. So it's no surprise that we go to that line because that's the thing that stands out. And so if we just tick through our 5 strategies, we're going to see that this graph doesn't really do a good job of effectively communicating the data. So what about showing the data? Well, the balance between the data line and that axis line is off. So this graph really not doing a good job of showing the data. There's also 2 data points that are not shown, so really not showing all the data. What about reducing the clutter? We've got these tick marks we probably don't need. We've got all these y-axis labels that are redundant, probably not helping us. We've got, borders within borders within borders. So there's a lot of extra stuff on this graph. What about text in graphics? I bet you don't know what WE stands for, or AO or SS. And no, I did not chop off the footer that had those described. It was not defined in the page, on the page, in the chart. They did not define these abbreviations. So we don't know what these mean. Okay, so we've gone through our first 3. What about the last 2? Small multiples. Yes, they use small multiples. Terrific. Imagine, if you will, one graph with all 12 lines on the graph. It would be impossible to read. And what's our last one? Start with gray. So here's how I start. This is how I start when I work with my graphs, when I work with data, is I start with gray. I've already made some decisions here. You can see that I eliminated 2 sets of Y and X-axis labels because the charts are aligned in a grid. I'm not sure I need them. I've spelled out each of the abbreviations, so now you know what these things stand for. And now I can start to layer on my pre-attentive attributes. Where do I want your attention to go? I want your attention to go to that data line. Now I want to make that line the darkest, thickest line on the graph. And now if we did the same experiment, my guess would be you would go to that dark, thick line because that's the thing that's important. That's the data. And now you might come back to me and say, yeah, but I like to have the axis labels on each of these charts. Okay, go ahead. I want to have the confidence bounds be dotted lines and not solid lines. Go for it. That's great. I want to use color. I want to do this. That's all great. There are not many rules for data visualization. It is a mix of art and science. You can't put rules on art. Okay, so I'm not telling you that my representation back here is the end all be all, is the correct answer to this. But just ticking through those 5 visualizations creates a more effective chart. It is not about, my argument here is it's not about good and bad. It's not about right and wrong. It is about less effective and more effective. How can you make your graphs as effective as possible? Okay, I just told you, and Andrea, don't worry, I'm wrapping up in a second. I know he's getting nervous because there's probably lots of questions. Okay, so I just told you there are not rules for data visualization. I partly lied, okay? Pie chart should sum to 100%. I don't know if that's a rule or that's just should be common sense. So I don't really view that as a rule. Here's the only rule for you when it comes to data visualization. Okay, this is the one that pretty much everybody in the field agrees with. And that is your bar charts should always start at 0. Okay, so this is a fairly infamous graph in the field from Fox showing the top marginal tax rate in the United States going from 35% at the end of 2012 to 39.6% in 2013. And you see this huge difference between the two. And the issue here is that Fox started their chart at 34%, which overestimates or distorts the relative values in the representation here. So what do I mean by that? Well, I want to give you, we're not going to get too deep into math. I'm going to give you just a flavor of math for your Tuesday, okay? So just a little touch of math. Okay. So imagine we've got these 2 bars. We're going to start this graph at 0 along our vertical axis. Imagine that the height of each of these increments along the y-axis is 1 inch, okay, or a meter. If you need to be on the metric system and can't deal with any more American stuff, you can think of it as a meter. It's fine. Okay, so let's take a ratio of the 2 heights. We get a ratio of 1.3. Let's now change this and start the graph not at 0, but something else. Let's just start it at 100. let's have that same height, okay? Let's recalculate. And as you can see, we get a ratio of 2. And so what happens when we start our charts as something other than 0 is we overemphasize the difference between the bars, okay? And this rule really only applies to bar charts because the pre-attentive attribute of the bar chart is the length or the height of the bar. It's not the scatter plot or line chart or dot plot because those use the position of the point in the space. And so if we go back to that Fox graph, we can see starting the graph at 0, which is sort of a normalized value, you get a much different picture of the data. I will also say generally that this approach of arbitrarily making decisions in graphs, I'm going to start my graph at 34%, not 29, not 28, not 27.2. I'm going to pick a strange top to the graph. I'm going to make it 34 to 42, not 33 to 49, something like that. I'm going to, whenever I see these arbitrary decisions, this is where my ears sort of perk up that someone might be trying to lie to me or trying to distort the data. Okay, this is the thing, this is the primary thing that makes me worry that I'm being misled with the visualization is arbitrary decisions. And very simply, right? If I showed you a bar chart of my height and my son's height in inches, right, and started this graph at 0, if I started this graph at 40 inches, it doesn't mean he doesn't exist. I've just totally just distorted and misinformed you, right? And so this is for me, this is the biggest thing to be on the lookout for mis and disinformation is arbitrary decisions. I'll also say just because we're talking today, because one question comes up about this is like, well, what if, I have this very small difference, but the difference is really meaningful. This was in the Washington Post on Sunday about the kind of fall and value of the stock market. It is not a bar chart, obviously, but I just wanted to demonstrate that you can do sort of a zoom in, zoom out. You can see here that, I think this is a very, very smart approach. This little kind of inset graph at the top goes from 0 to 5,700. And then you kind of have the zoom in here on the big chart as well. So if you are worried about how do I show small differences, this is one approach. Another approach is to show the percent change or to normalize them. But your bar charts, your column charts should always, always, always start at 0. Very quickly, I just want to wrap up with two last things. On small multiples, just notice here, small multiples can be used with any chart type. Maps, lines, scatter plots, area charts. All it's doing here is breaking up one dense, complex chart into multiple charts. So that's really all it's doing. And I'll just show you two. This one from the Brookings Institution showing different definitions of the middle class. That line that you see is the income distribution. It's the same across all 12 of these graphs. And those yellow bars showing different definitions. And again, imagine all on one graph. It would be really hard to disentangle or distinguish between them. Last thing, Andrea, I know, last thing. Starting with gray. I will say someone had asked about tools, and we'll have a few minutes. I can share some other tools that I like. But I use a lot of Excel for my work. And the one thing about Excel is that it's a very manual tool. There's a lot of clicking, a lot of selections, and sometimes it can be hard to do all that repetitive stuff. So in those cases where I'm using a tool like Excel, where I don't have the time or I don't have the patience to do this start with gray technique, right? Make every line or every bar gray. What I will do is the experiment that we have done together today several times, which is I will close my eyes for 20 seconds, open them up, and see where does my eye tend to go first. And if my eye is not going to the place where I want my reader or my audience members' eyes to go, then I need to make a change. But I just want to demonstrate this one more time. This is a very simple line chart. This is the amount of, I picked on the USDA earlier, so then I have to use their data later to make up. So this is the amount of different types of foods that Americans have consumed over the last century in millions of pounds. This is a pretty straightforward graph. You could figure this out. I've got the line on the bottom is fish and shellfish. The blue line at the top is beef consumption, which sort of spiked in the 70s, has been coming down. And chicken consumption is that gray line that's going up. You could read this graph. It's not not particularly fancy, right? But you couldn't read it if I made all the lines gray. There's no way for you to read this graph. There's no way to toggle or to attach the label to the line. So what this does is it forces me as the creator to make a decision. What is the thing I want you to focus on? And let's just say I want you to focus on this rise in chicken consumption. So I'm going to make that line thicker. I'm going to move that line in front. I'm going to give it a nice bold color. I want you to see what the other series are. So I'm going to kind of like use a different sort of desaturated color a little bit, push those to the background, and then do a lot of the things that we've been talking about. I'm going to add some good labels. I'm going to add a little bit of annotation. I'm going to, arguably add a good title. We could debate whether that's a good title or not. But I started here by figuring out where I want your attention to go and using that start with gray technique to force myself into that position. You could also use the start with gray technique to end with gray. So lots of examples here. I showed you the 538 example earlier. Sorry, here's one from NPR on high school graduation rates. Here's one from the World Bank on life expectancy. When you start with gray and you start to layer on your attributes, that might free you up to include a lot more data rather than just winnowing down to the 1, 2, or 3 things. Okay, wrapping up with those 5 guidelines. Show the data. Don't have to show all the data, but show the data. That's why people are looking at your graph or chart. Reduce the clutter. All the non-data stuff, reduce it, get rid of it, de-emphasize it. Integrate your message. Tell people what they're supposed to learn from the chart rather than just describing what's in the chart. Try this small multiples technique to break up that dense, complex graph that no one can read. Try a smaller multiple graphs instead of just that one dense one. Try starting with gray. Again, sometimes it takes too much time. It's too difficult. You don't have the time. Do the experiment we've done today. Close your eyes, give yourself a breath, open them, and see where your eye tends to go. And the last thing I will say is to always, always, always consider your audience. Who are they? What is their level of expertise with the graph, with the content? What platform are they using? What is their level of interest? There's a lot of folks here at the very beginning who are curious about presenting data to your audience. I will say that you don't always just need to throw the entire graph up on a slide. Sometimes just show them the axes first and then walk them through each of the data points. I can promise you that if you think more carefully about your audience, which I know Andrea and Ideas on Stage emphasize in all of their work, I know the more you think about your audience, the more successful you're going to be. And hopefully these 5 strategies that I've laid out will give you a good starting point to create better and more effective graphs as you go forward. So I know I went over a little 30 minutes, 35. Thank you all so much, and looking forward to some questions and conversation.
Oh, John, big round of applause for John. Thank you so much, John. Super, super presentation. I have to say, John, we started doing this series of special events with special guests. A few years ago, we had Carmine Gallo and Dr. John Medina, and I think all of the sessions were great. This one in particular, I loved it. Loved it because you gave us you made it super practical, so many practical things we can do to improve the way we present our data. So thank you so much. And the key takeaway for me, and it's not a coincidence that you also put it at the end, but I had my key takeaway before you mentioned consider the audience at the end. I think we should all be more intentional about the way we visualize our data, starting from the audience, thinking about who the audience is, what they know, what they need, and what we want them to take away from that particular set of data. Now, for everyone, we've got, say, 5 minutes more or less, maximum 10 minutes, no, 5 minutes for some questions. So if you do have some questions, please include them in the chat. I'm going to start with mine, John. Now, you mentioned that we should avoid 3D effects with graphs, bar charts, and you said, of course, it's outdated. I agree, but you also mentioned that that's not the only reason, the main reason why we should avoid 3D graphs. What's the main reason or reasons why that's the case?
Yeah, good question. So you can do this, you can test this on your own version of Excel. What happens when you create that 3D effect is that the software, it's not 3D, first off, right? We all know it's not 3D because you don't have to wear the red and blue glasses, right? It's what's happening is it's building a perspective rendering of what 3D looks like. So make yourself a very simple chart in Excel. use round numbers 10, 20, 30, 40, and then convert that to 3D. And what you're going to see is the tops of those bars don't touch the grid lines to the data that they're associated with. And so what happens when you use 3D is you get this distortion that's caused because the data no longer appear as its value because you have this perspective rendering. You can think of this even simply of a pie chart that's rotated to be 3D. That slice in the front because it gets the kind of the bottom thing there, whatever it is. That now takes up a greater percentage of the view, and so now it appears much larger than it actually is. So the biggest problem with 3D is actually distorts the data, not the aesthetic. But I'll stand by the aesthetic part because yeah,
I agree.
I
I
believe
agree
in it.
100%. A bit outdated.
Yeah.
Now, there's a question from Nuno. Excel is not the best tool for customizing charts according to best practices. I use Illustrator, but most people don't have access to it. What do you think about this?
Yeah, I mean, so I guess I'm trying to look up a link here. So I don't necessarily agree with that. So here is my book on data visualization in Excel. Um, so there are lots of things you can do with Excel to move it forward. Sort of supercharge it as it would. That's my latest book. Oops, there we go. That's my latest book on Excel. I would say, um, Illustrator, other tools like Figma, even Canva, even PowerPoint, can be used to do those really detailed annotations. But I would say, in general, I'm not. I think you can customize charts in Excel to meet best practices. I think it does take a little bit of work, but as we all know, as most people know or suspect, Illustrator is quite expensive, and it's not an easy tool to use. So it's not for the faint of heart. But I think you can apply these lessons and these strategies to any tool, including Excel. It's just about being careful and considerate and strategic about what you want to do. But there are times when you need that, really more specific control over each pixel, and a tool like Illustrator or Figma or Canva can allow you to do that. But I think for most people, a tool like Excel is going to be sufficient for what they need to make.
Perfect. And there's, I think, one final question from Sergey. Great to see you, Sergey, again. Which audience would like to see complicated charts with tons of data? I don't know, Sergey, if that's a rhetorical question, or if there was a question, feel free to elaborate. You can also unmute yourself if you'd like.
It is a question that's regarding to audience, that you should know your audience. I believe it's an excellent presentation, which is proving that regardless of the audience, if you are clear in presenting your data, then it will be excellent presentation.
Yes, 100% agree. And I would say, like, I think for a lot of us is like, you see a complicated chart out there and you're like, I'm not going to read that, right? And you sort of, you ignore it. I mean, I think like 538 is a really good example of really dense, complicated charts, um, that were geared towards an audience that wanted dense, complicated charts relating to sports. And so they, I would say, kind of knew their audience. Look, I'm a data guy, I'm a math guy, and I'm a data viz guy, but I didn't like 538 because the charts were way, even for me, they were way too dense. There was way too much going on. But I could see why lots of people did like it. And so I guess if I had like a summary message out of that would be to keep in mind that lots of organizations have target audiences that might not be useful for us, that we might not appreciate or understand. And so I would just try to, and also the platform is really important. Um, you know mobile versus desktop versus print versus audio. Lots of different ways that we need to keep all these different mechanisms of communicating data in mind.
Okay, John, we've got time for one final question, then we need
Yeah.
to wrap up. The question is from Mati. And the question is, do you use visuals or shapes in your graph to show amounts that are about the data? Or is there something that distracts?
So I think this is referring to maybe icon charts or unit charts that are using icons of maybe people or squares or circles that are counting. I go back and forth on this a little bit. I think as always with data viz, it depends. But I'll just say two things on how it depends. One, when you're presenting graphs like that, where you have, let's say 10 dots or 10 squares, and you're comparing it to 5 squares, that might be more engaging because you can see each individual object than, say, a bar chart, which is just a set of rectangles. That might be more engaging. And if engagement is your goal, if you need to get people onto the page or need to keep people's attention in a presentation, that might be worth doing. The second thing I'll say is I have personally sort of moved away from using icons of people. I find it really hard to find icons and use icons of people that I think accurately capture the variety of identities that we have as human beings. And so if you use all icons of men in a chart or all icons of a certain color, I have found it more and more difficult to do that well and to do it in sort of an equitable, representative way. And so I've moved away from icons of people more towards your kind of abstract shapes. I don't think it distracts if your goal, especially if your goal is to engage people. But I certainly don't like throw like random icons onto my line chart just because I want to, add like some spice or make it pop or something like that. I let the data do the popping, let the message do the talking, rather than these sort of extraneous objects that maybe I don't need.
So again, it very much depends on what the goal is.
Absolutely.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Let's wrap it up. Now we're going to include a few links with free resources in the chat. You'll see the first link is what I promised at the beginning, a virtual goodie bag, which includes lots of free resources and promotions from our supporting partners. Check it out. Also, if you've never seen it, the Confident Presenter Scorecard, it's a way for you to very quickly assess your current presentation skills. And this is also beyond data visualization. It's just presentation skills in general. You just need to answer a few questions. It's free. It takes less than 3 minutes. You'll get a score, and the tool will also identify opportunities for improvement for you. And also, the third link is our web class. This is a free web class that we run every other week. It's a presentation skills web class. We go through fundamental principles of communication and how you can apply them in your own context. If you don't mind, Ron, please include the links. Again, if you're interested in the web class, we've got 2 dates coming up. One is on the 15th of April. The other one is on the 30th of April. Feel free to register for the date and time that works best for you. And just one final thing, and I'll close with this. But this is not for everyone. It's another opportunity for you. It's not for everyone. This is only for established business owners or business leaders who are motivated to take their presentation skills to a higher level and who are also motivated to take action to make it happen. If that's you, at the moment, I have an opportunity for 5 complimentary, completely free presentation consultations to see if there's a fit between what you may be looking for and what we have to offer. And regardless of whether or not there's a good fit, I can promise you that if you attend the consultation, you'll walk away with much greater clarity on how you and or your teams can become more confident, more effective presenters. And you'll also walk away with a free copy of my book just for agreeing to have a chat. If you are interested, it's very simple. Just type 1-to-1 like this. I'm going to do it here in the chat. Just type 1-to-1 for a 1-to-1 consultation. If you're and I see already a few 1-to-1s in the private chat to me. As you prefer, you can do it privately. You can express your interest in the public chat. Just to clarify, if you type 1-to-1, you are not committing to anything. You're just telling me that you would like to learn a little bit more about what this consultation is about. If you do that, then I will get in touch. I will give you more information about the objective of the consultation. And then if together we agree that it makes sense to go ahead, then we'll go ahead. We'll find a time to speak. And that's it. John, thank you so much again for taking the time today, for sharing so many useful and practical tips and insights. I really appreciate it. For everyone, thank you very much for attending. I do hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you found it useful. Let's keep in touch. All the very best. Ciao.